You sent the message, you watched it deliver, and now it's been read. The ticks turned blue, the receipt confirmed, and there is nothing. Rationally, you know they're probably busy. Rationally, you know there are 100 explanations that have nothing to do with you. You have said those words to yourself already, more than once, in the time since the ticks turned blue. And yet, something in you has shifted. A low-level alertness that wasn't there before, a monitoring you didn't choose to start. Your phone gets checked with a frequency that feels embarrassing even to you. What it's taking from you isn't just the 10 minutes of distraction, it's the stability you had before you sent that message, the ease that has now been replaced by waiting, and by the particular anxiety of not knowing what the waiting means. The disproportionate feeling is not a personality quirk, it is a nervous system responding exactly as it was trained to respond, and the training happened long before this conversation. What you are experiencing is a feature of anxious attachment, one of the 4 attachment styles first mapped by psychologist John Bowlby and later developed by Mary Ainsworth through her foundational research on how early caregiver relationships shape the nervous system's expectations of closeness and availability. Anxious attachment developed when early relationships were loving but inconsistent, when the caregiver was sometimes warm and present and sometimes withdrawn or unavailable, without clear pattern or warning. The nervous system learned that connection was available but not reliable, and so it developed a specific response to perceived distance: hypervigilance. Stay alert, monitor, don't miss the signal. Being left on red is not a minor inconvenience to that nervous system, it is a recognizable threat pattern. What the next 2 minutes explain is why that response is so difficult to reason your way out of, and what is actually driving it. Most people who experience this interpret it as neediness, as being too sensitive, as caring more than they should about something that shouldn't matter this much. That interpretation makes it a character problem. What it actually is a nervous system running a threat detection program that was calibrated on real inconsistency. The sensitivity is not excessive, it is precisely calibrated to the environment it developed in. The problem is that environment no longer exists, but the calibration does. That is not neediness. That is a nervous system that hasn't yet learned it can afford to stand down. Mechanism 1. Inconsistency trains the nervous system to monitor. The brain learns what to expect from patterns. In a relationship where warmth and availability were consistent, where a caregiver responded reliably and the child could predict their emotional presence, the nervous system settles. It doesn't need to monitor constantly because experience has shown that connection will be there when needed. In relationships where availability was inconsistent, present sometimes, absent or distracted others, warm in ways that couldn't be predicted or earned, the nervous system cannot settle. It has to stay alert because the pattern is unreliable, and missing a signal could mean missing the only available window of connection. Psychologist Mary Main's research on adult attachment patterns demonstrates that this monitoring strategy becomes encoded as a default, applied automatically to new relationships in adulthood, regardless of whether those relationships are actually inconsistent. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between a genuinely unavailable partner and a busy one. It responds to the gap in communication the same way it always has, by escalating alertness until the gap closes.
Mechanism 2. Silence activates the same circuitry as rejection. The second mechanism operates at a neurological level. Social rejection and physical pain share overlapping neural circuitry, a finding replicated consistently across multiple studies in social neuroscience. Researcher Naomi Eisenberger, whose work on the neuroscience of social pain has been widely cited in clinical and developmental psychology, demonstrated that the experience of social exclusion activates the same regions of the brain as physical injury. The body does not distinguish between being physically hurt and being socially shut out. For a nervous system already primed to monitor for withdrawal, a read receive with no response is not a neutral event. It is processed as a genuine threat. The anxiety is not disproportionate to the signal the nervous system is receiving. It is disproportionate to what is actually happening, and that gap is where the work lives. You check your phone more often than you would like to admit after sending a message to someone who matters to you. A delayed response from a specific person produces a quality of anxiety that feels different from ordinary impatience, more urgent, more physical, harder to redirect. You have rehearsed explanations for the silence before the silence is over, constructed narratives for why it happened that almost always include something you did. You feel a disproportionate relief when the response finally arrives, relief that is bigger than the situation seems to warrant. You are more relaxed in relationships where the other person responds quickly and consistently. The ease is notable enough that you've wondered why some connections feel so much less exhausting than others. You are not too much. You are someone whose nervous system learned to treat silence as information, because at some point it was. The anxious response to silence is not evidence that you are too attached or too sensitive or too much for the relationship. It is evidence that you have a nervous system that learned in a specific context that inconsistency was the norm and that staying alert was the rational response to that norm. Understanding that doesn't make the response disappear, but it changes what you do with it. Instead of treating the anxiety as a verdict on the relationship or yourself, you can start to read it as information about your nervous system and work with it from there. Drop a comment. Is it the phone checking that you recognize most, or the constructing explanations for the silence? Most people find it's one more than the other. If this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe and leave a like. It's the best way to make sure the next one finds you. Next, why you've stopped believing things can actually get better, and why that isn't pessimism.